Welcome back to Sales versus Marketing. I'm sitting down with VP of Sales for RSA Security, Shawn Cruise. RSA Security, if you don't know who they are a cybersecurity market leader. They are at the forefront of cybersecurity technology, and they help businesses go through their digital transformations safely and securely. They are a network security company with a focus on encryption and encryption standards. And a couple fun facts: they were actually acquired in 2006. They were founded in 1982, but they were acquired in 2006 by EMC for $2.1 billion. And as we all know, EMC was later acquired by Dell. So RSA is a subsidiary of Dell, obviously a name that we all know and a very, very large company. RSA exclusively has over 3,000 employees. Very excited to be sitting down with Shawn as he is their VP of Sales. I'm going to let Shawn give you a little bit of background about what he's done, but to list off the companies that he's worked for, starting off with Corel, going through to QNX, NetManage, Adobe, Tibco, and then most recently RSA. Shawn has over 30 years of sales experience, so I'm sure he will give us a lot of great insight and knowledge. But looking forward to the session.
Sure. So my name is Shawn Cruise. I'm the Vice President of Sales for RSA Canada. We are a major division of the Dell EMC family focused on digital risk management. So we as an organization, you may be familiar with what's called tokens, RSA tokens, encryption. So we're a historical leader in the encryption space, particularly around identities. That's where our company was born. That's our heritage. Over the last 25, 30 odd years, we've developed a very broad suite of technology offerings focused on digital risk management. And if you take a step back, what is digital risk management? Well, it's a broad series of things. If you think of the world going through major digital transformation, where businesses are transforming user experience, mobile apps, they're changing the interfaces to their customers, they're reorganizing workflows and processes from the edge where customers are being engaged, applying digital marketing, all new types of things into their business, which go right back into the core of how organizations work. That's digital transformation. Digital risk management is the parallel best practice on how organizations manage risk associated with this transformation. And that can mean anything from compliance to things like GDPR, health compliance, federal compliance in the financial industry, right down to things like threat detection, cybersecurity, incident response. It's a very broad suite of capabilities that we bring to the market, tied to the best practice of digital risk management while you're transforming your business. It's quite large. It's fairly new. It's new to our company, and it's new to the globe. We started this user experience transformation 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago when mobile devices really became powerful. And now transitioning, and as the world kind of tips and we see more digital technology, people are starting to realize that with that benefit comes a lot of risk. And that's where we fit into the model.
What I find interesting is you're a large company, but you're playing in a space where you like what you just mentioned, people are still going through their digital transformation, but you're selling a product that's something in like almost like an extra layer, an extra step on top of a company's digital transformation. So just to sort of frame it for people that are listening, how does RSA properly or most effectively engage with customers when a lot of them are still understanding how to properly go through a digital transformation? And that could be something from like a small mom and pop all the way to, Fortune 500, like Fortune 100.
Sure. It's almost a different talk track for the size of business that you're in. So, when you think of small to medium enterprise, the reality is digital transformation means something different to local businesses that it does to large scale enterprises like banks, insurance, big public sector entities. So let's separate those two, because I think it's important to have a distinction on those. Small to medium enterprise typically doesn't have massive legacy business processes. They don't have these massive, sets of technologies that they need to manage. Digital transformation could be as simple as changing my website interfaces, opening up some new channels of communication to my consumers, whether that be online or different types. In that context, there's a risk associated with people piggybacking on mobile users that are coming onto your sites. There's all kinds of different things that are unique about a small to medium enterprise from a risk standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
They're really facing different challenges. So phishing attacks, mobile users, a whole suite of other kind of what I would call risks. Typically, the small to medium enterprise may not also have as much public sector policy or compliance issues as perhaps some of the larger industries. So they need to think about things like general data protection or privacy in different ways. When you compare that to, say, manufacturing, public sector, big banks and insurance companies, they've got massive armies of people, huge infrastructures of data. They've got dozens and dozens of ways that people can interact with them. The threat landscape for a large enterprise is much different than a smaller one. So, local stores that are, changing their online presence don't have the same level of risk from a threat standpoint as the larger landscape of, say, a big enterprise. So it's quite a bit different. And what we provide is the ability to look at your digital transformation as a maturity model. Think of it as some businesses are only 4 years old, and other businesses are 20 years old, and the requirements of those two are quite different. So when you look at the maturity of your digital footprint, what are your risks? So first, being able to identify perhaps what are the risks associated with how you're using digital technologies, and then be able to figure out what types of solutions would apply. That would be a best practice for, say, a small to medium enterprise. When you compare that to a large-scale bank or insurance company, public sector agency, crown corporation, it's way different. As I said, the amount of ways people can communicate with those entities, the amount of data that they're collecting, the amount of people that are involved, because there's different types of threats. So when you look at that, the methodology that you would apply would be quite different. It would be much larger. You need to really isolate each element of your business and look underneath to figure out kind of what are my risk touch points here. And ideally, which is the opportunity, is that you're rolling risk management at the same time you're completing transformation. If you're dealing with new mobile applications, we'll apply the thought process right there and build it in so it's designed in, versus what has happened over the last 5 to 10 years, which is we put some stuff out and we think about risk or security afterwards. It's a way different conversation and talk track.
And how do you, as so you're VP of sales or area VP of sales, first of all, what is your role within the company, and how do you properly, in your role, because obviously you have a rather large team, I'm assuming, that would sell underneath you, how do you properly manage that level of, or that variance of different type of customer sets amongst your team?
Well, it's interesting. And any sales rep, there's different types of sales roles in our organization. Any large territory or large organization would typically have, what are called, focused account managers or named account managers. You'll have territory managers. You likely have product specialists that are tied to specific technology. Anytime you're in the level of complexity of technology like the RSA offering, you're going to have multiple roles involved in customer engagements. You will have field engineers and specialized engineers. It's a large team approach to selling, and each person has a different role or responsibility in that team approach. So when you look at an entity like Canada, typically, starting from one coast and going to the other, the DNA of an account in BC is way different than the type of buyer in Alberta, which is different than the type of buyer in the Central Prairies, which is different than the person that you're dealing with in Toronto, likewise in Ottawa, Montreal, Quebec City. So you're ideally aligning your resources to the same style of territory that they're covering. You
Hmm.
would not typically have somebody flying in from Toronto to go sell into Calgary. That's not in your best interest. It's just not the way things are done there. So the idea is, first off, making sure that you're aligned into the region. So my responsibility is to look at the overall country, take our solution sets and technologies, align them into whatever territory model that makes sense, ensure that those models have the proper resources underneath them, and then apply marketing and communication strategies, selling methodologies to really do everything within the context of a sales cycle: early stage demand generation and business development, mid-range sales methodology and cycles to press opportunities into the close process, and then of course the fun stuff, which is contract negotiation, targeted closing, and others. So as a sales leader, in this role, it's quite complex because on any given Sunday, I can find myself doing just about anything in the organization. And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah. Yeah.
anyone that is really functioning in this role, I am a legal consultant, a marketing consultant, a
Yeah.
operations consultant, a commissions consultant. Like the idea of being effective here, if you're going to really succeed in this industry, in this role, you need to have a broad range of expertise and experience, which is something I've been fortunate enough to develop over the 30 years of my career to where I am right now. It's fun, but it's complicated.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, and just the complexity not only of the sale but of your role is it's definitely a lot as a sales leader to take that on and obviously execute efficiently. So you mentioned like you've had 30 years of experience that have led you to be able to be successful in this role. So let's go into like who are you? What's your what's your past? Like how did you get to where you are today? All that fun stuff.
So yeah, I don't have the luxury of a university degree, and my path to where I am today is quite, it's quite unique. I would say that I lucked out to a certain extent into the tech sector back in the late '80s. I had an opportunity to go, at 20 years old and fold boxes in the shipping room of a startup at the time called Corel Corporation, which is the
No,
early graphics
yeah.
technology provider for those that know the company. Corel Draw back in the early '90s was it from a graphics package standpoint.
That's going back, and they're not such a startup anymore. So,
No, no, they're not. So, I spent a couple of years there and really learned the kind of the back end. At that time, technology was delivered in manuals. Technology was delivered on discs, and putting a package together required, somebody to put, 5 1/4 or 3.5 floppies with some books and shrink
yeah,
wrap it and put a label on it and send it to somebody. And in learning that part of the business, when I left Corel, I went to another startup called QNX Software in Canada, outside of Ottawa, and that was my first opportunity in a smaller organization around customer service, telemarketing, and telesales. So I got hired at QNX to work in the production area, which is folding boxes and making labels, and within short order, one of the vice presidents, Mike Hornby, who is one of my mentors, gave me an opportunity to get on the phones and talk to customers, and it was like the lights went off. I was at home. My understanding of the back end infrastructure of what went into a box and what we shipped and how we shipped really provided me a viewpoint on the customer service calls that we were getting to really learn from the ground up. And it took about 2 years in kind of telesales and inside sales. I spent 2, 3, 4 years kind of just cutting my teeth, made lots of mistakes.
yeah.
It was in an early industry where there was no such thing as anyone mature, because everybody was in their 20s and 30s, and there were sales leaders, but they were coming out of the
Hmm.
hardware environments and mainframe, and the tech sector didn't exist. So I spent almost 8 years at QNX, and ended up traveling around the U.S. and going all over, and through my late 20s, I really developed kind of the rudimentary selling capabilities there, and there was there was no doubt once I got my first commission check, it was over.
Yeah.
I understood the concept of what that meant, and from there I spent a long time forging my way in an industry that was growing throughout. So I spent 7-8 years at QNX. I had the good fortune of doing a startup at Fastlane Technologies, which eventually sold to another provider. Spent some time with NetManage, which was early web technologies, and I would say my career really kicked into gear in 2005 when I joined Adobe, and entered into what I would call one of the coolest companies, cool technologies in the world, doing cutting edge user experience and creativity. And Adobe really offered me an opportunity to develop my leadership skills and really grow with an organization that was, we were seeing 50% growth within my territory year over year consistently for almost 10 years. It was
That's
a really
incredible.
exciting time.
Yeah. No, that's crazy. So after Adobe, where did you go after that? Because that's where you, I guess, first were in like a sales leadership management position.
I did sales, so I did management at a company called NetManage in 2000 to
Okay.
2004. That was my first. That was my first real leadership role. So I spent almost 4.5 years doing both a direct sales leadership position as well as running North American systems integrators for NetManage. So we were a legacy mainframe technology with a emerging opportunity around helping these kind of legacy iron companies get to the web. The product was called OnWeb. So that was my first opportunity at it. I really honed the skill at Adobe over 10 years. And in 2015, at the top of my game, we just closed one of the biggest deals in Canadian, the Canadian ecosystem. I was leading in terms of regional performance at Adobe. There was a lot of great things going on, and I felt like I had been there over 10 years.
Yeah.
I wanted
Yeah.
to try something new, so I left Adobe and started my own consulting organization. And really, I spent the next couple of years working within different startups, trying to raise money. I tried my own startup for a while. Frankly, I failed miserably at a bunch of efforts and did okay at some other. And I didn't make any money through those couple of years, but I really enjoyed. It was a significant learning experience for me. It gave me an opportunity to lead a company at Oproma, which was a great experience. It gave me an opportunity to do financial raises and deal with some different entities. I did
Yeah.
a trade mission over to Ukraine. I did a trade mission into the EU and NATO and attended some shows there. A ton of really interesting people. After 4 years of doing that and living without, benefits and,
Yeah.
just kind of chugging my way, I decided to come back into the leadership arena. Moved from Ottawa to Toronto a year ago to kind of reset my opportunities and see what could happen here, and that's what led me to the RSA opportunity.
So that's a great story, and that's like your experience is just is super impressive. Out of you've made a lot of moves over your career. You moved from all these different individual contributor roles to sales leadership to entrepreneur, back into leadership. If you were going to say like your lessons learned, like just to put it in perspective for people that are more junior in their career, to get to where you are today, what lessons would you tell your 20-year-old self are like the most integral to get to where you are, I guess, as efficiently or as effectively or as quick, or is it even beneficial to get there quick? Maybe it's good to take the route you took, try some things, fail, learn all these different things that sort of make you who you are. So I'd love to sort of get your input on that.
Sure. There's in answering that question, we have to kind of step back. And so, when I engage and I mentor a lot of junior salespeople, inside salespeople, people that I've touched over my career. We still talk regularly. As while we were talking, I had a text from one of the telemarketers that I know that worked with me for me in a past.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer to that question. There's no, you can't look at sales as you can't. There's no quick. I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's no quick way to
Yeah.
become highly skilled at this. Experience and time are really the things that matter, and it takes time to develop relationships. It
Yeah.
takes experience to be able to be ninja-like in the sales arena. So if I were to answer the question, what would I tell myself? The reality is just keep taking every opportunity you have
Yeah.
and make the most of it. And I guarantee you're going to fail at a bunch of things, and I guarantee you're going to succeed at some stuff. And you use those, and don't look at any individual. Selling is really hard. It's
Yeah.
tough.
Yeah.
And selling in this day and age is even harder because it's harder and harder to separate yourself. Walk onto any trade show floor and you'll see 100 vendors and they all look and feel the same because there's very little differentiator. 20 years ago, there was a ton of market differentiators. It's really hard right now. So the differentiator is people,
Yeah.
and the differentiator of people is your own personal reputation and style. I don't think there's an easy path to get to become an enterprise salesperson. It's no different than a path to become a judge or a highly skilled heart surgeon. The reality is you
Except there's
can
no
do it.
school for it anymore. There's no school. There's school for all those things. There's no school for, or I guess there's some programs now, but there really isn't that many in comparison.
No, there's really not, but there is the School of Hard Knocks, which is the one. When I look at the most successful salespeople, they all have a common. There's a common element to all of them,
Yeah.
and that common element is their willingness to do just about any role as part of an engagement. And that common element is also their reputation. The best salespeople in the industry carry great reputations, and people that tarnish the reputations young by acting inappropriately and doing different things, it's going to carry with you, and it's going to limit your ability later in life. So the to answer your question, number one is take every opportunity and learn from it. And number two, don't expect this to be a 2 or 4 year path. It's going to take 5 years for you to mature and go through the first set of gates. It's probably going to take another 5 years for you to pass through the second. After 10 years, now you become a highly skilled salesperson and get into a position. Now, there are the exceptions. Some people accelerate and move through this, but generally speaking, it's going to take time.
So my question to you is, as a sales leader, I'm gonna have two questions. So I'm gonna first start with, how do you find good people? And then the follow up to that will be, how do you find good people that are ambitious enough to want to move up and to want to learn, but are patient enough to understand that it's still a waiting game to get those skill sets?
It's really a good question. I think the funny thing about finding good people is some of the best people in sales have come from the craziest of backgrounds. And I think, I'm going to tell you a story about, one of the best sales people that I know, or one of the best inside sales people that I know, actually served me at a bar in a local restaurant that I went to frequently, having pints after work. And the thing that, in getting to know this person, we have a ton of people that have university degrees or different types of degrees that end up working in the service industry along the way. And one of the things about that service industry is you get used to approaching people and communicating with people because you're constantly working for the tips.
Yeah.
And that fundamental skill is something that I've seen over and over again as the foundation to make great salespeople. So you find salespeople all over the place on LinkedIn. You can find them anywhere. But the places where I find them best are some of the most weirdest locations. Retail outlets, when you go in and you talk to somebody and you see someone with a really good skill, in this day and age, we have to be ready as sales leaders to bring those people in at entry level, inside sales, and other positions and turn them into the types that we want. The three most successful people that have worked for me that I know all come from that same type of background. Random. One guy who was by far and away the most successful salesperson that's ever worked with me, made 7 figures multiple times, comes from a furniture background. And those fundamental skills on the retail floor are what transitioned and allowed that person to grow into an enterprise class technology person. A lot of great stories in this industry like that.
No, that's good. But and you bring these people on, and they're not in sales, they're not in tech. So how do you successfully transition them into a role so that they can be successful? Because yes, they do have to learn somewhere, but obviously there's some portion of coaching or mentoring that plays a part too in their success.
Another good question. I'm and I do this all the time with junior and inside. It's kind of a hone. So let's sit down. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what's happening. Let's talk about what's going to happen when you go out on your own. And then I put my hand on their back and push them out the door and say, come back in a couple of days and let's talk about what happens. So, in a perfect training environment, you kind of have three elements. There's corporate methodology because you need to have, you know, corporate training to understand the company and how the company, so that's one element. The second element is the mentorship and leadership of a sales leader or someone that you can attach someone to that can provide that. And then the third element is just go try. And the go try part is the biggest part of it. So what we need to do, there's a game called Rebound. I don't know, it's still out in the market. It's little marbles, and they bounce up. It's
Yes.
like shuffleboard.
Yeah.
I always say to junior salespeople, my job is to provide you the boundaries so you can bounce back and forth, so you don't hurt yourself. But the best person to help you is yourself. Take this methodology, which is the corporate side, learn from it, take what I provide you and learn from it, and then go out and learn and practice and skill and see how that develops and then do it again. It's like a constant cycle.
Do you find that sales reps it could be coming from sales and coming from tech or people that are coming from the outside. Do you find that they try and default onto you as like a resource that they should be using a little bit less, but they try and use more than they should be? Sort of like they're just like always coming back, always asking questions, scared to go out on their own when you try that.
I think, part of what we need to do as sales leaders is be prepared to make tough decisions about personalities, right?
Hmm.
I've met a lot of great people that are in the wrong positions. And that's not a statement on, someone's value. It's a statement on the fact that we put you in the wrong position. So let's find a good spot. So, there's no bad questions and there's no bad engagement with a sales leader unless it happens 100 times. If it's constant and consistent. So what I look for is, incremental development because it takes time. If you ask me the same question 3 or 4 times, I'm okay with that because I want you to be really good at that. And part of my job is to, when you ask me a question 3 times, I'm going to apply that to you and see if you're learning over time. If you ask me the same question 8 or 9 times, maybe that's an indicator that we should
Yeah.
look at elements. So it's the balance between the two. There's no right and wrong answer there because sometimes you have to be patient, that little extra bit with certain people. Others go fast, others go slow. You kind of have to just watch and see because not everybody matures at the same pace. And I've seen some really great salespeople mature just beyond the point where people were ready to move them into some other role and they just needed that extra little. So the difference between being a good sales leader and a great sales leader is figuring out when you put too much in and you need to make a move versus when you're right close to having someone be the person that you've been training them for.
And how do you see that? Like, how do you see if somebody is, because obviously you want to try and push those people into the right position when you're hiring and onboarding them, because you don't. It's expensive to let them flounder in a role for like a significant period of time. So, what are the person? Well, I guess you kind of mentioned the personality traits, but what other items would you look for outside of just almost like I'm blanking on the word, just like a very charismatic individual who is okay at approaching people. What other traits would you look for in somebody when you are bringing them on, that would support their success outside of just their personality?
Well, I think personality is top of mind, but I think certainly kind of appearance. So the second thing you want to look for is how does somebody appear? you know,
They present themselves. Yeah.
and sometimes simple things, personal hygiene,
Yeah.
how does somebody carry themselves in the are their hands clean, like
Yeah.
simple things that you can pay attention to over time, and are they dressed well, nice, different things like that. And that's not always a perfect indicator, but certainly, personality is number one, appearance is number two, because the other, you can train somebody and teach somebody on technology, you can teach them methodology, but you can't teach them, personality, and you
Yeah.
can't teach them hygiene and personal growth,
Presentation
right?
and just professional appearance and whatnot.
Exactly.
So, so that's great. So let's talk more. So we sort of spoken on hiring and what to look for outside of the traditional norm. We've spoken about like coaching and accountability. Um, for an individual to be effective, obviously it depends on the market. But for sales strategy, what type of sales strategy does RFA or do you subscribe to when actually interacting and dealing with customers? Is there a certain one that is a Sandler, or is it challenge, or is it just like that we focus on solving solutions and identifying pain points, and it's more like a high level? Like what is your thought on that?
Well, I think, every organization will have a variation of its own sales methodology. So we here at RSA use force management. In previous lives, we've used Sandler, Bosworth. At the end of the day, as a sales leader, over the course of your career, you're going to get exposed to different methodologies. So, I think out of that methodology, great sales leaders incorporate multiple elements as part of a regional development strategy. So one of the things that always frustrated me throughout my career is that we take salespeople, drop them into a territory, and then a year later wonder why they haven't been successful. Because if you're in sales, you should just go sell, right? I think the reality is, organizations need to take a significant level of accountability. And I talk to my sales team about this, and I talk to my sales leaders. I believe the corporation generally should provide you 50% of the in-region kind of support. And when I say, when I use that number, so as a sales leader, I look to bring in partners, bring in channel, bring in my field marketing, bring in my own network and Rolodex
Mhm.
and others into a region, into a territory, to help my rep create demand. It's my job to help that early funnel and develop that early funnel with a sales rep in every region that I manage. And I think if I am accountable for half, well, guess who's accountable for the other half?
Yeah.
And I think, given the amount of investment that we make in selecting somebody and training them, we spend a year and a half, it behooves us as an organization to invest intelligently in the development of the territory in support of the goals of the territory. So I apply a really somewhat unique model in the sense that I actually carve the business plan, for lack of a better description, into two elements. Here's what I'm going to do in your territory. Here are the things that we as a company are going to provide to you: field marketing, channel development,
Hmm.
different resources, events, workshops, business development. There's our half. Now let's look at the work that you're doing to accelerate what we're providing and create the other half of your pipeline. And I think that's something that, a lot of sales leaders don't really, because it means I'm accountable to my team
Yeah.
across the board in individual elements. And I think, that's one of the areas that I think every company can improve on, is really understand, like, we owe our teams and our individuals effort. We owe them investment. We're accountable to assist. So I'm responsible for vision. I'm responsible for strategy. I'm responsible for resourcing and a bunch of other elements to help you. So now that you got all these tools, how are you going to then take these tools and give me the other half?
It almost helps make the accountability placed on the rep a little bit more easy to swallow, because now they know that you're coming to bat for them. And I think that's a really good point, that a lot of organizations don't do this well, because how many times, and it's ridiculous, because they invest thousands, hundreds of thousands in training development, then it's like sink or swim. By here's the phone book, go sell, which doesn't really make any sense because I've already invested thousands of dollars in you as a rep. So why wouldn't I support you to the best of my ability? It's a really strong point, and I think that more organizations, that's probably why as a sales leader, as an organization, you are successful, because you don't have that just sink or swim mentality. You really do support. No, that's
I
yeah.
think it, just to add to that, one of the things that anyone in sales, when you're going through the interview process, very often we don't spend enough time asking questions about the company's thought process around in-region development. How much field marketing has been applied into the region over the last year? How many workshops have the company done? How many executives have visited into the territory? How many customers are there? There's a whole series of really great questions that should be asked in an interview process of salespeople to really understand what you're getting into. It doesn't mean you don't take the job if those things aren't there.
Mm-hmm.
What it does mean is that you really understand the situation you're entering into, and it allows you to then go back and go, okay, so we talked about this in the interview. You said, there was no field marketing for the last year. How are we going to increase that? Because that's 15% of my business development number.
Yeah.
What about this? What about that? And I think, some advice that I can give to anyone, whether you're a sales leader or someone that's going through an interview process, it doesn't really matter. That's a really healthy conversation to have. What are we doing within these 8 regions, these 10 regions? Let's pair each one off and look at Ottawa. What's going on in Ottawa? When was the last time an executive was there? What relationships do we have? There's a lot of really great questions that are really simple, and very often we're afraid to ask them because if I ask, I might be accountable for something afterwards.
But it's a good point, because maybe you don't want to be with an organization that doesn't hold their leadership accountable to providing for the sales rep. So maybe that's a great indication of a good and strong organization versus somebody who you don't want to work with. So
it's when in the interview process with RSA, with my current leadership, one of the things that we had a conversation about. So what would this look like? And I drew out my strategy and said, this is what's going to happen. These are all the pieces. This is how it would flow. This is what it would look like. Are you okay with that? Do you see this? Does it make sense to you? Do you buy into this? Because that's what I'm going to employ.
Yeah.
If I'm a successful candidate, and I want to make sure that we understand and agree with each other that this is what we want, because we want this, this, and this. And if you can have that conversation in the interview process and look someone in the eye, you're going to know really quickly whether or not it's the right type of place, because you're going to get a reaction of, that's awesome, tell me more about all these things.
Yeah.
Or you're going to get the glassy-eyed kind of empty space look. And literally, that's an indicator that maybe what you're being offered is not really kind of the right type of place for you. And I think it's really important that we ask these questions on both sides so we understand what we're doing.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Because if you have somebody who's not bought into your vision, and then 6 months down the road, when you're rolling this out and you're implementing it, it's like you're a leader, so you're doing your thing, you're executing, and then they don't understand why the results aren't coming, or they don't understand what you're doing, or they're cutting you off at the knees. That's listen, it's not helping anybody. So
my to that point, my one, I've had many bad experiences selling throughout my career, as any good salesperson or sales leader will tell you. The one organization that I regret joining, that situation was exactly how it worked. We presented, here's the plan, here's what we're going to do. We all agree. We laid an agreement out on a 6-month period, and a month in, they're like, yeah, no, we were just kidding. We're not going to do all that. We're going to do all this, and it's way over to the left. And that relationship broke up really quickly.
yeah,
And that's the reality is what you just described happens all the time.
it does happen, and it's unfortunate, because I think that people hire. The average tenure of a sales leader, a VP sales, is like 18 months or something like that. It's like, and it's getting even shorter, and it's because you can't even miss 1 year. So is that because VPs all over the place are bad at their job, or is it because that they're not setting the right expectations? And I think it's probably a little bit of, there are some bad VPs out there, but that's not the majority.
I think it's a really great segue. The reality is that's a combination of the sales leader not properly articulating kind of the plan, and it's a a symptom of short-sighted companies who don't really appreciate the impact of that, and it spins out of control. And I have
Yeah.
tons of friends that come. One of the things that I say to people all the time is, "Are you sure you want to go into sales management? Are you
Yeah.
sure you're going to make less money, take all the knocks, be
Yeah.
accountable?" Like, there's a whole bunch of things that happen, and some people do it anyway.
Yeah,
Like
no,
me.
it's no, it's definitely less stress, and I think that you always want more, right? You're an ISR, you're an inside rep, you want to move to an account executive, you want to move to a manager, director, VP, but it doesn't get easy, and like once you're a VP level, I think you realize that being an individual contributor is sometimes a lot less headache and not much less money, if anything, maybe sometimes a bit more. It depends on who you sell for.
Yeah.
But okay, so that was really good, and that was a really good talk. I guess you've been in the industry for a long time in sales, so your input on this would be really great. What are some of the worst sales habits that you've seen? It could be for individual contributors, and we've again touched on some here and there, but like the things that you wish would just stop and people would stop doing, and other managers and leaders would stop training just because they're so ineffective or ludicrous or outdated.
It's funny. In the last couple of years, I've seen this over and over again, and it constantly shocks me. I can't tell you the amount of people that I've seen that go into sales calls without notepads or pens and don't have the courtesy, even if you don't take notes, to open up the book and lay the pen down. There's an opportunity for a sales 101 professionalism course around how to act inside of a meeting. And I think millennials are worse, because they pick these
Yeah,
devices up and go into texting in the middle of, and these things need to be shut off and face down. And when you have the courtesy of getting an opportunity to communicate with someone who is a decision maker, and it's happened to me where people are selling to me where they're texting or doing stuff, you're done. Literally,
yeah.
you're done right there, because so I wish people would take the time to really think about an engagement. That drives me nuts. The
It's
second,
oh, go ahead. Sorry. No, go ahead.
the
No,
second thing.
I was gonna say just that it's a poor habit of the same type of individual that also wants to jump from job to job to job. It's like that need for immediate gratification. That thing is plaguing this generation, younger generation. So I think it's not only in their progression through their career and their lack of ability to stay in one job more than 6 months. It's also with their interactions with people in real life, lack of patience, lack of just slowing things down, which hurts. But yeah,
Yeah, no, totally. And to add to that, I think the preparation is a lost art. We apply some level of thought process, but generally speaking, I think we don't really prepare well
hmm,
for sales calls, and then more importantly, we don't prepare well for follow up and outcomes. And I think in addition to professional selling 101, which is how do I look and act in a meeting, there's more work to be done on preparation. And preparation is some really simple things. And I did this with you. I went into your LinkedIn. I looked
yeah,
at kind of down your bio to get some background. So if we had conversations, they would be relevant. There's a bunch of really simple one-on-one type things that you can do that make you more knowledgeable going into a meeting. Then there's more complex things like reading CEO targets and the material in media and press. You can find out a lot about what's going on inside of an organization without touching anything. Just go on to the media and the press. And if you really want to impress me, take a client that you're selling to and go look at their competitors and
yeah.
look at what the competitors are doing, because that makes you even more knowledgeable on how they're being positioned against themselves. So I think preparation is something that we all need to do a better job of. And I think corporations, companies, we're guilty of it to an extent. We talk about preparation, we talk about readiness, we talk about all these things, and then boom, when the sales cycle hits, everybody runs and let's go close a deal, right?
Yeah, and nobody actually does the work ahead of time. Um,
Exactly.
you had a second point too, to the worst sales practices.
Yeah, I kind of tied the two
Oh,
together,
okay,
the
okay.
preparation, the no notepad, and but organizationally, I think the thing that the industry really needs to stop doing is, we as an industry, we oversell and underdeliver. And I think, when you look at the statistics on failed projects within technology, they're staggering. Look at Canada's federal government, their statistics. You look at statistics for, if you really dig into, insurance and banking and financial and retail, the statistics are terrible. And that's a symptom of organizations not staying with their clients to ensure that they achieve the value of what was promised. And I think as an industry, if we're going to, do one thing better, we
Mm-hmm.
need to mature our ability to help customers realize the value of what we provide, what we sell. And I think, customers, so I think clients should demand more. And it's always surprising to me that not as many customers as you think demand, value realization or ROI documentation. In my 30 years, you know, RSA does it well. I think there's some other companies that have done it well, but fundamentally, overselling, under delivering is like the technology industry's flu. Everybody's got it. Everyone suffers from it from one quarter to the next. And you can take a bit of medicine for it, but we go right back to our previous behavior. We're not helping ourselves in the industry.
Do you think that's regional to Canada, North America?
I think it's generally organizationally across the board, and I
Okay.
think it gets,
Just in
there are
tech. Yeah.
companies in our industry that are worse than others, but I fundamentally would tell you that I don't know, or I'd be hard pressed to say to you, here's an example of an organization that was consistently and constantly delivering high value realization material to customers to understand the value of what was sold in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to differentiate yourself as a sales rep, and if you want to make really big money in this industry, which you can, being able to deliver that to your customers, it will set you apart from any other organization, any other sales rep. So if you want to learn a skill, that's one that I think most people don't have enough of.
And you could even, speaking to the accountability piece you spoke about before, hold your organization accountable to helping you deliver those and measuring and
Exactly.
tracking that ROI realization after the project's done. So you're not just walking away. Your organization is not just walking away. That's really good. So that's really all I really wanted to cover. I think that we covered a lot, and it was really great talking. So thank you. Is there anything that I didn't mention that you'd want to bring up about sales, anything in particular?
You know, I'll just close with this.
Okay.
Sales in the tech industry, sales in this field is significantly different than car sales, real estate sales, insurance sales. This industry is unique. It offers an opportunity to, make, the kind of money that very few in the world have the ability to make. And I think, it is a incredible environment to work in and learn in. And I wish more people would take the time to let their careers develop into this industry. And I think, there's an enormous opportunity right now for the next generation of young salespeople to really be highly impactful. There's so much cool stuff going on, and I just hope everyone is patient enough to kind of allow time to develop. And in my opinion, my recommendation, if you can stay with your first company for 5 years, it allows you 2 or 3 full sales cycles so that you can actually cut your teeth in an environment before you go out and do selling. It would be a piece of advice that I would recommend to any junior inside sales or other. Let yourself get through a couple of full-on sales cycles within your first environment, because
Hmm.
that's going to set you up for success later.
That's great. Okay, so just to close this off, you've obviously had a great career. Other people in your life, in your career, mentors that you would think people should follow or engage with. Like, where do you get your learnings from? It doesn't have to be anybody flashy. It could be an industry expert. It could be somebody who has been an author or anything like that.
I follow everybody and everyone and anyone. I read I stay current on the news. There's not one person that I point to that I would say this person stands out. And not because there's not people that don't stand out in my life, because there's lots of them, right? I think the reality is you have to just connect everywhere. Use all the social medias, Twitter, LinkedIn, like all those communities, and connect with as many people as you can. You cold called me on LinkedIn. I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, let's talk, because what you're doing is really cool. And that's I believe, take 1 minute to communicate and read and look, and you'll never know what you're going to find.
No,
I
it's.
don't have any one specific person that I follow. I follow like 10,000 people.
Do you have any like books or resources that you go to?
I've read all the books, Seven Habits of Good Sellers, The Art of War, Sun Tzu. I read as much as I can, and I there are a few places. I recommend you find and follow sales VP. So Chris Rinaldi, my boss here at RSA, is a great person to follow on LinkedIn, because he's putting a lot of content out. He's been in the industry a while. He's younger than I am, so he's got a viewpoint that's different than I am, and I think he's a good example of it. There's others like that. I think identify companies that are doing cool things.
Yeah.
The heads of Adobe sales are really cool to follow, and a few others, because they're constantly posting and putting new stuff out there. I think you just got to be putting yourself out there. And I remembered what the second point was that I forgot to mention, was lack of curiosity. I think,
Okay, so there that lends cadence to that then.
yeah, we as people are not curious enough. Ask questions, get out, go to an event, and try and meet 100 people within 15 minutes,
Yeah.
because that means you're working, and it's all good.
No, Shawn, that was great. Thank you. So that's all I have. Just to wrap it up, thanks again, Shawn, for taking a second to sit down and talk. Very impressive, your background, and I really do hope the people that were listening had a pen and paper down and were taking some notes, because 30 years of sales experience shows, and the insights were incredible. If anybody who is listening would like to meet or engage or interact with Shawn in any way, he is on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Shawn-Cruise. 519-9803/. This is how I reach out to Shawn to originally schedule him for the interview. So obviously he's open to connect. So reach out to him there. But outside of that, thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. Check the show notes for everything we spoke about here and more. And I look forward to speaking to you next time. Cheers. Bye. So this is my favorite part of the podcast, Scott's Thoughts, where I talk about some of the points that Shawn discussed and really just provide some context and let you know why these are so important in your role, in your business. So Shawn brought up a ton of great stuff, and it's really hard to sort of whittle it down to the key takeaways. But one thing that I really, really wanted to drive home for people that are listening, that are maybe a little bit more junior in their career, and some of these obviously do apply to sales leaders as well. One thing that I thought was really great was that the onus of 50% of sales support that the organization brings to the table, the organization, there's an onus on them to bring up to 50% of the sales support in a territory. This onus is on the organization. So when Shawn is running an organization, he's bringing marketing. He's making sure there's executive visits in the territory. He's making sure there's trade shows, vendor partners, lead generation, all these things that can support sales efforts and build out that initial funnel. Shawn is making sure that the organization is pulling its weight, because obviously when you hire and you train and you onboard somebody, it's very expensive to bring them into the fold and then just let them go on their own and have a sink or swim mentality. So one thing that I really liked that he brought up was the fact that he makes it a point to bring a lot of resources to the table to support sales. and that's something that companies should hold a standard to. And also, he mentioned that if you are interviewing for a job, this is something that you should discuss with the person who's hiring you, just because it's so relevant to your own success as an individual contributor. He also brought great points for hiring and training and what his process was. So he broke it down into 3 specific points as to how an individual should be trained properly for success. So the first was obviously the corporate training, you dotting your I's and crossing your T's. Then there was the coaching and the mentoring, which the sales leader brings to the table through their own experience. And lastly, it's pushing them out the door and letting them go do it. And it's okay if they fail. They have to learn somehow, but it's really getting them to go do it once they have, of course, all the resources and the training and the preparation. So that was really great. He also mentioned that it's okay to ask questions, but you want to make sure that you aren't asking the same question again and again and again once it's been clearly delivered to you if you are the right person for the job. So he wants you to learn on your own, ask questions when you can't come to the conclusion on your own, but at least show an improvement. Baby steps, marginal improvement is really good as long as it's moving in the right direction. Another thing Shawn brought up for managers that are looking to hire, you don't always have to hire within the context of the sales environment or the sales arena. What Shawn had highlighted was some of the best people that had worked for him came from non-sales, non-traditional sales roles, especially non-technical roles. And he learned to identify proper personality types that could make connections, could establish meaningful relations with people, even if they weren't slotted into a sales role. One example he brought up was somebody who was a really outgoing and personable waiter or waitress, and they were able to successfully transition into a sales role, and they were one of the most successful just because of the personality skills that they've built. So again, it's bringing it back to being able to establish that level of trust. And how else do you do that? Well, by being a very authentic and real and engaging human being. And those people can learn the technology, they can learn the process on how to sell, but the actual personality is the hardest part to actually train someone. So that's why he's been so successful finding it elsewhere and then teaching the parts that he's very capable of teaching as sort of add-ons and other things that will help them be successful. But the personality is the core. He also, last but certainly not least, highlighted some of the major issues he sees with sales reps today. And if you are an individual contributor or if you're managing a team, these are good things to pay attention to. So always be more curious. Just look more, do more research. You want to, if you're having an interview or if you're getting in front of a stakeholder or a decision maker, you want to be able to be prepared. So go do your research, understand what their organization does, what their role does, what they do. Go to LinkedIn. There's so many places where you can go for information. It's not, in 2019, you're at a serious disadvantage if you haven't done your proper research ahead of engaging with somebody who you're going to have a conversation with. Be professional and present well. So these are like the bare minimums, and it's unfortunately something that he has to point out, and it's too bad because it really shouldn't be something that you have to point out. These should be things that are almost like the status quo, but they're not. So be professional and present well. It goes a long way. And also, outside of doing your research in a sales context, being prepared and being professional, when you're in the actual engagement and you're trying to sell something yourself or a product, you want to be there. You want to be present. You want to take notes. You have this golden opportunity presented to yourself, and a lot of people squander these opportunities by playing around on their cell phone or texting or just being distracted, whereas they should be completely 100% focused on the person they're speaking to, and that's going to really drive their success and obviously make the person who they're engaged with feel like they actually care and they actually want to be there and they actually want to solve the problem, and they're not confused or distracted by their phone or their friend that's texting or an email that just came in. Those things can all be handled later. When you're in the moment, be in the moment. So those are great takeaways for both sales leaders and individual contributors, sales reps. As always, I really do hope that you enjoyed this podcast. Shawn brought a ton to the table, way more than I can just quickly review now. There's so many points, so go back and listen again with a notepad, with a pen and paper if you haven't already. I really am glad I had the chance to speak to him. And always leave some feedback, leave some comments. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like. And if you have any other suggestions for people that I should bring on the show or other topics that you'd like to hear about, please leave a comment in the description below, and I'll be sure to feature those people or those topics on future episodes. If you haven't already, hit like. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit subscribe, or you can always get this podcast wherever you can download podcasts: iTunes, Stitcher, Google, any podcast outlet where you download podcasts. I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe, and always share with your friends, share with your colleagues. That would mean so much to me. Thanks so much. I really appreciate you tuning into the Sales versus Marketing podcast. Have a great day. Have a great week ahead of you, and talk soon. Bye now.